Welcome to our Knowledge 20 Customer Journey series. You'll hear firsthand stories from organizations that are turning to KPMG powered enterprise and ServiceNow to get work done in new ways and apply lessons learned to drive toward the future of work. Chevron, a multinational oil and gas company, shares how they satisfied a diverse group of skeptical stakeholders, how they tackled the change management journey to influence dramatic change, and how they're leveraging the platform to support their Imagine IT vision for the future.
So thanks for joining, everybody. Welcome to the ServiceNow Knowledge 20 digital experience. And today we are talking striking digital transformation and basically how Chevron leveraged ServiceNow to influence dramatic change across the organization. And who I have with this morning is Mr. Don McAllister. Don, I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, and Warren Cox, a colleague of mine from KPMG. Don, maybe we'll start with you, a little introduction and background. We partnered together in 2019 to drive this IT service management transformation across Chevron's global organization. Could you kind of tell us a little about your role, your background with Chevron, and why 2019? What was the background of this, and how did this happen?
Well, hello, Mark. Thanks for interviewing me. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm responsible for ITSM and event management teams for all of Chevron IT. In 2019, we'd come to the end of our life cycle around ITSM. We needed to refresh. And we had three drivers in this effort. So the first was we needed to deploy quickly. In our previous deployment and our major upgrades, it had taken 12 to 18 months. We knew we couldn't move that slowly. Over time, we've done a fair amount of customization for our business units who kind of had their individual processes, and that led to a high degree of technical debt. It made it more expensive to support, so we wanted to get much simpler. And finally, we have a drive to delight our customers, so we wanted a system that's much more customer focused.
Great, thanks, Don. And I'll also introduce Mr. Warren Cox. Warren, if you think back to 2019, we partnered with Chevron to kind of help them plan this transformation out and how it was going to look, how it was going to feel. If you kind of can take yourself back to that, and one, introduce your role and how you got involved, but two, what were the kind of the key points that you thought as we planned this out, that what was going to make this stick, what was going to make this this transformation work?
Thanks, Mark, and good to be on with you, Don and Mark. My name's Warren Cox, as Mark said, and I led our organizational change management efforts when we did transformation with Chevron. And Don hit on some really great points when we first started the conversation in 2019 with Chevron. It was primarily focused on the three things he laid out. And what we found was if we integrated all of our fulfillers, all of those ITIL users into the platform early, frequently, and even on a consistent basis, we were able to really drive a more intentional user experience and user interface. And what that led to along the way is a natural flow of organic communications. And when Don mentioned earlier that we needed to deploy quickly on the Chevron project, that's exactly what we did. And I know we're going to get into a little bit of conversation later about learning in the flow of work. But ideally speaking, when we heard Chevron's use case for what they were trying to accomplish, interjecting or intersecting really that incredible user experience, great user interface, and doing it quickly while keeping a really diverse set of stakeholders engaged and along the way and along the journey, it definitely presented a really, I guess you'd say, a large scale challenge and one that was exciting to work through with Chevron. And I know during the whole implementation, we not only combined the project team with the change effort with Chevron as a client team, but when you step back and you look at 2019, I think one of the drivers of why we were able to get it done so successfully and so quickly was because you couldn't tell where one part of the project team left off and the other picked up. So that fully integrated experience, I think, is really one of the most rewarding parts of the project.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if I go back to a couple words, Don, that you said, that you talked about the three key drivers, but one of the things that I always struck me that helped drive this project was that the project was called a refresh. So it wasn't just we had to move on a new platform, but that word refresh, meaning, hey, we needed to kind of, wash our faces and wash things clean of some of the things that we'd done in the past and begin anew. So I don't know, what did that word mean to you? And when you thought about refresh across the program, what are some examples of things that we needed to refresh?
So let me answer that a couple of different ways. So we do have a life cycle for our major systems. And for ITSM, it was 5 years. So we're at the end of that 5-year cycle. So we needed to take a look. We need to do something different. But on a larger scale, as Chevron as a corporation and IT in particular, our corporation has an effort underway to really make a digital transformation. So we needed a system that fit that. We needed a system that was much more user-oriented versus fulfiller-oriented. We needed a system that was integrated. One of the primary drivers for selecting ServiceNow was the modular capability built within the Now platform. Part of our strategy was to adopt ServiceNow and the modules on an exception basis. If it's in ServiceNow, we'll take it, unless there's a reason we can't. This has several advantages. So ServiceNow is integrated. It simplifies the support. If you build an integration for one module, it's there for all the other modules. The user did not have to learn the variety of systems that we had prior to ServiceNow. So every major system came from a different vendor and had a different interface. So this really simplified things for the user. It simplifies the back-end support. It simplifies the integration. And it's built from a customer point of view. And this went very well with our corporate drive to be much more focused around the business, not the back-end IT.
Really, and Don brings up a really great point that reiterates, again, one of our guiding principles through this process was we wanted to make sure in the implementation, just as Don said, we not only involved the business, but the business was a part of the implementation process as a whole. And that was really, again, it was a key component of how we integrated all of the experience into the implementation, getting feedback, bringing folks into the system early and frequently. And we know, as Don referenced, that bringing the business in, specifically at Chevron with their business unit model, we knew globally that bringing them in was going to be a challenge. And exactly like Don spoke to, bringing them in and collapsing some of these legacy systems they were used to, really showing them a new way. And again, falling back on that learning and the flow of work. Great point, Don.
I'm going to set Warren up here, but I wanted to go back one step, if you don't mind. I remember, like, one thing I really remember is getting over that first hump, Don, of hey, we can't let people into the system until it's ready to go. And you and Chevron, I think that's what you were used to doing, but you really, took that leap of faith with us and saying it's better if we manage expectations and let people in there. It's better to get them in there and get their feedback and be a part of the solution. And Don, what do you think the key was as far as getting over that hump and kind of allowing people to get into a platform that wasn't fully baked yet?
Okay, so I think it's a couple of things. Number one, as I said, we had people who have been in this area for over a decade. And, when we say we're going to deploy in 7 months, they said, well, you just can't do it. The business units won't accept it. They will have to have training just for them. And so we said, if we want to deploy in 7 months, we can't do it the way we've always done. So let's give it a chance. Let's take a leap of faith. Let's do it the KPMG way. We know we can't do it our way and do it in 7 months. So the anticipation was that there'd be a lot of pushback from the business units, but in reality, there was almost none. They were very happy to see the system early because they've suffered over the years from having a system deployed to them with minimal feedback. And so they get a system, they have some problems with it. It's very difficult once it goes live to change it. So they were actually very receptive to getting early, not just to look at it, but the ability to give us feedback. How can we change it to better fit their needs?
And Warren, I know you're chomping at the bit here. So can you talk about, I mean, we're right in your wheelhouse here, right? I mean, can you talk about that methodology and how how it kind of fit with Chevron and some of the experiences you had as we did the learning flow work and the Spark program, and talk a little bit about those things.
I would say the major driver of the mindset shift at Chevron in our deployment was that we, as a collective team, we didn't focus on trying to convince folks that the change was great. We didn't try to sell them on a new platform. We didn't try to sell an idea that this was going to be great. What we focused on was adoption. And we did that through really peering into what does it mean to be transparent? And what Don hit on was exactly what the transparency became. Hey, there's no sense to wait until we get far down the line for you to see the system and interact with what we're introducing to you as a new way of working. What does this mean for you? And not only what does it mean for you, but allow us to teach you in 10 to 15 minute bite-sized learning opportunities. And that's what brought us to our Spark groups, which is really a unique and very innovative approach to how we not only get feedback, but also gave folks the opportunity to go into the system and play around. And when we introduced that concept and that idea, I mean, Don hit the nail on the head. I mean, people were ecstatic. And I think they were still blown away with, wait a minute, you're going to let me look at this and it's not even finished? Absolutely, we are. And as soon as folks got in, what we saw was, and again, this was the turning point, we saw the level of trepidation and fear drastically diminish. Because once we opened it up and said, go inside of this environment and play around. And not only do we want you to go in there and play around, but if you find something that doesn't work, send us a note. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a follow-up call in this Spark session, this 2-week sprint. We're going to ask you, we're going to send you a survey. We want to know everything that you know. And the remarkable part, again, about bringing the team to a fully integrated and fully comprehensive team, that feedback immediately made it into the hands of the developers, our steering committee, our project team, the leadership at Chevron, and we were able to report on a weekly basis. The other things Don hit on earlier, and Mark, you mentioned them too, was we promoted a high level of trust. Once we tore down the wall around the transparency of a new technology, the trust factor began to grow. And that's really where our Change Champion Network came in. We needed to install this global network where not only we could support the project in its current state, but we wanted to leave a lasting impression and a legacy group that had the tribal knowledge of how this happened. So we integrated the Change Champion Network into the project team as well. And when we did that, it made the implementation process seamless. You couldn't tell where one team left off and the other picked up.
Yep. You know, I think one thing I wanted to, oh, go ahead, Don.
I think another success factor for our successful deployment was the culture of the two companies. I think both companies value transparency, collaboration, and just getting the job done without who gets credit for it. Our teams were mixed. We didn't have a Chevron team and a KPMG team. We had one deployment team. And I think if you talk to our end users who were part of the Champion Network, went into the Spark environment, interacted with our team, unless they looked at our email addresses, they would not know offhand who was a Chevron employee, who was a KPMG.
No, I'm so happy that you said that. I think, and and a couple things that this triggered me is I thought was so important, Warren, and I was a little skeptical of this too, is when we were having these Spark environments, it's not so much that you're gathering feedback, it's what you do with that feedback. And that reminds me, Warren, like I remember at the beginning of our implementation, you were talking about, our approach. I remember you kept talking about feelings. And I just remember, feelings. What do you want me to do about feelings? But now that I think about it, I mean, Don, one of the first things that you said at the start is that one of our kind of measures is that we wanted to have a delightful user experience, and delight is a feeling. What is a delightful user experience that we were going for? And then, I mean, maybe you could chime in, Warren. How do you measure that?
The systems that we had at Chevron have really been implemented by IT. And they tended to optimize it for the fulfiller. So they optimized it so IT could do its job. So it made it easy for them to fulfill a request or procure something for the business. But it was not optimized around what is easy for the user. So we were kind of looking at more of an Amazon type model where it's all based on what makes life easy for the user.
Mark, and I remember the conversation you're referring to. Don, you were in the meeting too when we opened up and showed a slide and I first asked the question. So 2 parts of kind of the way the human brain works, I think and I feel. I posed a question and asked how many folks in the room would start off your response with, I think. And of course, 99% of the hands went up in the room, because when we think about a technical implementation, that's the part of the brain that's really triggered, is the part where we calculate the quantifiable part of the way that we operate. And so it always seems to become an I think perspective. Let's get knowledge out there. Let's get information out there. Let's get facts out there. And what we sometimes discount is the I feel part of the experience. And, you hear, I mean, let's be realistic. You hear IT, information technology, and instantly you think, hey, well, I use the word, there you go. I think it's all logic based. But if you finish out what the focus inside of this implementation, and really the focus around a lot of ServiceNow implementations, are IT service management. And when you throw in the service part of it, you immediately provoke an in-service mindset, which instantly leads to I feel. And it's about feelings and that delightful experience that Don spoke to. So the approach that we took was making sure that the scale remained balanced all the way through the implementation. Because if the thought behind that is, if we went the entire implementation and all we focused on was getting a system, to Don's point, that made things easier, that just simply made things efficient and made things happen, all we're going to get on the other end of that is a very bland experience. If we were truly going to shift mindsets of how the group using ServiceNow interface with customers and made it delightful, it's not just about the user interface. User experience is encompassing also of the folks doing the work behind the scenes. So we had to invoke that I feel part of the implementation. And that again is where Spark came into play. It's also where another part we haven't spoken about was opening up to general audience show me sessions. And this really started to invoke the feeling that, hey, I'm integrated into this implementation. And when we opened up, we're all familiar with show me sessions, of course, in the Agile Scrum methodology of working. But we took show me sessions in this implementation to a whole new level. We opened it up. At one point, I believe we had right at 1,100 people across the globe on one auditorium style and video and virtual session of where we were demonstrating the capabilities of the ServiceNow platform. Not only did we walk through and demonstrate, but we gave a little bit of additional knowledge during that meeting that day. And then we did something unprecedented. We opened up the entire session for live Q&A through the digital Q&A feature inside of our platform. And then in the end, we had an open mic session where we allowed folks to ask questions. The unique part about this was we started to allow all of our folks on these sessions to understand that we weren't just promoting inclusivity, we were demonstrating that the project thrived on all involved had to be included.
You know, Don, at KPMG, you know, we talk to IT organizations about, we call it the future of IT, and kind of, you know, basically developing at market speed and having a beautiful user experience for your customers and for your employees. And when I think about those messages, it aligns very closely to the Imagine IT messaging that Chevron has. Can you just talk a little bit about what Imagine IT is and how that kind of drives the, you know, the path or the you know, the themes of kind of where you're going as an IT operations organization?
Okay, so as I mentioned, the corporation is, and this started prior to the oil downturn and COVID-19, had a program to turn it into more of a digital company. And so obviously IT is a major player in that. And so our function in that digital transformation, we're labeling Imagine IT. And so it's really around a few things. So number one is digital platforms. Today, IT is distributed. There's a lot of organizational complexity. So we're reorganizing around digital platforms. So about, you know, 12 to 24 digital platforms. And a platform is organized around a major business flow, like refining or marketing. So it's based around what's important to the business. And then there's another set of platforms which are the basis of the IT function. So network, email, cybersecurity, ITSM. And so we're doing away with a lot of the organizational complexity, and we're really forming a team of teams. So we have kind of a structure that support these platforms, and then we form teams as initiatives come and go. So we have digital platforms, we have team of team versus rigid organizational structures where there's a lot of friction between organizations. Another big driver is data accessibility. So we generate gigantic amounts of data. And so part of this is how do we use that data? How do we make it available to the business to get value from that data? And then probably the final part of Imagine IT is the workforce. Do we have the right workforce? And so we've, for a couple of years now, had a pretty intensive training underway, and we're really staffing up in things like software engineers, data scientists, technical. We have many more technical leads, product owners versus, traditional administrative managers. So those are kind of the four areas: digital platforms, data accessibility, kind of retraining the workforce, and then team of teams versus some rigid organizational structure.
So I think I'm going to start to wrap this up. Don, I just wanted to, leave a couple, one big question with you. I'll try to shrink it. but organizational change management, everyone knows that acronym now. It's kind of it's table stakes for any implementation. But I think if you click down, a lot of people just think it's communications and training. If you had some advice for our friends listening in here, if they're about to take on a big implementation, what do they need to consider from an organizational change management approach? And, just any advice you would give another organization as they're about to transform?
I would say the number one success factor for a big transformation is you have to have top-down support and drive. So it has to come from top management that this is important. We need to do this.
And then, Warren, if you could maybe just leave the people with some kind of key takeaways from our conversation, just, if they're going to take something away that they can go forward with, what would those be?
I'll base it on what we saw, as Don was mentioning, most successful at Chevron. Be transparent in your communication and be consistent and keep that consistent message that's supported by leadership. The second one, don't be afraid to let your users into the system as it's being developed. Allow them to be a part of it. Integrate them into the development process where applicable and where you can. And I would say, lastly, leverage a champion network across your organization. Let folks learn from their peers. Let them hear the messages coming from the folks right across the aisle from them. Let them learn from folks that they've been working around for maybe 10 or 15 years. It reinforces the message and increases the level of trust so much. And all of those really lead to that level of transparency of just dropping the veil and letting folks recognize that it's humans doing human work. And it's okay to make a mistake as long as you let them be a part of the journey with you.
Fantastic. Well, Don, Warren, I really appreciate you spending this time with me this morning, and just kind of collecting some thoughts on our transformation. And I really hope the folks watching can take some good nuggets from this and drive this forward. So thank you both.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to bringing you additional insights, lessons learned, and much more as we continue the ServiceNow Knowledge 20 digital experience. In the meantime, learn more by visiting us at kpmg.us/K20digital.